The fork hit the table with a dry tap, right as every pair of eyes in the room turned to me, like they'd been waiting to hand down the same verdict. No one softened their tone. No one eased into it. Connor's family was always like that. When they wanted to accuse someone, they did it right away without thinking. "Dinner's too salty again," my sister-in-law Tori said first. Her voice sounded like a casual comment, but her stare was sharp enough that I could hear what she really meant. It was my fault. Blake, Connor's brother, leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. "Ever since Rhea moved in, this house has been a mess. Even our meals don't feel like meals anymore." I didn't react. I just glanced at him, then at my plate. None of this was new. I'd heard it enough times to know exactly what they wanted: someone to bow their head, apologize, and promise to fix things. Connor sat next to me, eyes fixed on the table. As always, he wanted peace more than he wanted the truth. Marion, my mother-in-law, set her napkin down. Her hand shook a little, but her voice was sharp. "My son has pulled away from this family ever since he married you. Every strange thing that's happened lately started with you, Rhea." No one in that room mentioned all the times Connor chose to skip family gatherings because of work, because he was tired, because he didn't want to be controlled anymore. Every reason disappeared. Only I was left on the scale. I stayed quiet. My silence bothered them, like they needed me to accuse myself so everything could fall neatly into place. Marion tilted her head and looked straight at me. She said the line that froze the whole room. "From the day you stepped into this house, you've destroyed the structure of our family." Anyone else might have cried or snapped back without thinking. But all I saw was something obvious. This family feared anything they couldn't control, and I was never someone they could shape to fit their design. I looked at Marion, steady, clear, not angry, not rushed. "Funny," I said. "He's the one who changed, but somehow, I'm the one paying for it." Connor looked up for the first time that night. Blake froze. Tori tightened her grip on her glass. Marion leaned back a little, like she hadn't expected me to answer right when she thought I'd fold. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to make them understand. What I said was just the truth placed exactly where they didn't want to see it. The table went so quiet I could hear the air conditioner. No one had an answer. They were all stopped cold by one thing they didn't see coming. I wasn't accepting the blame. I wasn't unraveling. I wasn't breaking. Marion let out a short laugh, not exactly amused. "So you think you have no part in this?" I looked at her. "I know my part, and I know everyone else's. You're all just choosing to look in one direction." Tori cleared her throat, ready to continue the attack, but the air had shifted, not in a better way. It was heavier, thicker, like the whole room was waiting for something none of them could name. Connor finally spoke, but his voice was weak. "Maybe we should lower our voices a little." No one listened to him. No one ever did in moments like this. Connor, the man I married, was the kind of man who avoided conflict so well that his silence always left me standing alone. He never meant to hurt me, but his weakness cleared the path for everyone else to do it instead. I kept my eyes on the table, then looked at each of them. No one looked away. They were waiting for me to step back. They were used to people admitting fault just to keep the peace on the surface. But I had no reason to do that. Not tonight. The air felt trapped in everyone's chest. I could sense how uncomfortable they were as they realized I wasn't going to melt the way they expected. I folded my napkin and set it on my lap, slowly, like I was handling a small task. When I lifted my head, my eyes were still calm. No one spoke. No one interrupted. They had no idea what was coming next, only that I wasn't the person they thought would stay quiet forever. It was the one moment that night when the room no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the truth. The thing they'd been dodging for years. And I, the person they thought they could accuse without effort, was the one who would open that door. The air in the dining room was still heavy from what I'd said, but in my mind, old images were rising again, sharp and clear. When I said we needed to go back to the day I first stepped into this family, I didn't say it for drama. I said it because everything really did start there. On the day that should have been joyful, but instead became their first test for me. On my wedding day with Connor, the sky was dim and cold. I still remember the calm I felt when I looked at myself in the mirror one last time before the ceremony. But that calm didn't last long. Marian walked into the dressing room before anyone could announce her. She didn't knock. She never did. "Rhea, your dress needs adjusting," she said in that usual tone of hers, calm, but with a sweetness that pressed down like hardened syrup. I didn't even have time to answer before she pulled a section of fabric at my back and motioned to the stylist. "Lower this part. It doesn't look appropriate for our family." I didn't argue, but I looked at her through the mirror long enough for Marian to understand that I saw exactly what she was doing. She was deciding for me. As if it were her right. The first cut always looks like that. Small, sharp, and easy to mistake for something harmless. Blake was next. He walked up to me while everyone was getting ready to head to the aisle. His eyes ran from my head to my feet, judging me like I was something that needed to meet a standard before being put on display in their family. "Are you sure you fit in with this family?" Blake asked. His tone wasn't mocking, but it was very intentional. "We have our own standards," I answered. "If you're asking just to see me worry, then no." Blake raised a brow, like he wasn't used to anyone giving him a direct reply, but he didn't say anything else. Men like Blake plant doubt and then wait to see if it grows. And Tori, who always smiled even when she was cutting someone down, leaned close to me as guests began to arrive. She adjusted my veil, gentle enough that anyone watching would think she was being kind. "You look beautiful," Tori said. "Just try not to be too stiff. This family isn't used to women who keep their distance." It sounded like friendly advice, but I understood what she meant. You should soften. You should listen. You should be more like the women this family knows how to control. Those small cuts didn't make me bleed, but they showed me the real picture. This family didn't want a wife for Connor. They wanted someone easy to manage, obedient, and afraid of their gaze. I wasn't that person. And they realized it before I did. Back then, Connor always said the same thing. "They don't mean anything by it. Don't take it too seriously." His words were like a thin layer of ice over a deep crack. All it took was someone pressing a little harder for it to split wide open. But Connor believed his reassurance could keep everything calm. He thought he was protecting me. In reality, he was leaving me alone. In the days after the wedding, the rhythm of his family's control became clearer. No one showed open hostility. They used politeness to hide their strictness. One evening, Marian said to me in the kitchen, "The way you organize things is a bit odd. This house has its own system." She didn't ask. She simply stated it, as if everything I did was automatically wrong. On another day, Blake asked Connor right in front of me, "She's not very talkative, is she? You sure she fits with our family?" As if I were some product he was checking for defects. Tori would send long suggestion messages about how I behaved at gatherings, always starting with, "I'm only saying this because I want you to fit in better." But everything after that was nothing but polished criticism. I didn't argue. I didn't fight back. But I didn't bow my head or reshape myself to please them either. I kept my boundaries, and that was the one thing they couldn't stand. Connor's family ran on a very simple logic. Anyone who stayed quiet and followed along was welcomed. Anyone with their own stance was a problem. I was the second kind, and from there the unfairness started piling up. If a dish didn't taste the way they liked, my fault. If Connor was too busy to show up at a gathering, my fault. If the family didn't feel like it used to, also my fault. I became the name they reached for anytime something felt off. They didn't yell. They didn't slam tables. They used soft blame that repeated over and over, like water slowly carving through stone. The thing that mattered most was that Connor knew. I saw how uncomfortable he got every time his family hit me with those soft but poisonous remarks. But instead of standing with me, he chose silence. "Rhea, I'll talk to them later," he always said. But later never came. And every time he stayed quiet, they became more certain that I really was the problem. His avoidance didn't keep the peace. It only made them push harder, and left me more alone. Then one evening, things shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. Marian pulled Connor aside. I couldn't hear what they talked about, but I knew it wasn't simple. When Connor came back, his face was tight, like he'd just been handed a responsibility he didn't want. "They want to talk to you," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Why?" "They just want to clear the air, make things more comfortable at home." I looked straight at him. "Do you want this talk too?" He paused, then said, "I'll take your side." You know that. I'd heard that line enough times to recognize what he wasn't saying. He wasn't sure he could keep his word. His eyes, even when he tried to steady them, still held that familiar flicker of worry, the fear of disappointing his family. That conversation wasn't meant to clear anything up. It was a private hearing they'd been preparing for a long time. And Connor, even while claiming he'd stand with me, carried a hesitation that would make everything heavier later on. I just nodded. No reaction, no questions. Because when I looked at Connor that night, I understood something. He wasn't the one creating this mess, but his weakness was exactly what would let it grow. The meeting happened on a Saturday night. Not the casual family dinner they called it, but a staged session arranged with care. I knew it the moment I stepped into Marian's living room and saw how they were seated. Not casually, not comfortably, but in a formation like each person had a role to play. Marian sat in the center, back straight, hands clasped. Blake leaned into his chair as if he'd rehearsed his lines for days. Tori chose a seat close to me, but the kind of close meant for watching, not comforting. Connor stood behind the group instead of sitting with them. He looked like someone who wanted to disappear from the whole situation, but was forced to be present. I sat down without a word. I waited. Marian started first. Rhea, tonight we need to speak honestly. This family has been unsettled for a while, and we want to understand why. The way she used the word we told me everything. This wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict session. Blake leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Let's start. Since the day you came into this family, I've never once seen you actually try to fit in. You always stay on the outside, keeping your distance. I looked at him calmly. I behave politely. I don't think polite means I have to be close. Blake smirked. That's the problem. You're always that stiff. Tori cut in, her voice soft but calculated. What Blake means is, you haven't opened up to the family. A lot of relatives think you come off a bit cold. I turned toward Tori. I don't remember talking long enough with any of them for them to know whether I'm cold or not. She smiled, a smile trying too hard to look sweet. You're doing it again? The way you answer sounds disrespectful. That was their second cut of the night, accusing me of being rude so their story would make sense. Marian nodded, like she'd been waiting for that line. You don't realize it, Rhea. You speak to elders without choosing your words. I kept my eyes on her. I'm telling the truth. But the truth shouldn't always be said like that, Marian replied, her voice cold. What way then? I asked. The way a daughter-in-law should speak, or the way someone easy to control should speak? That question froze the air for a second. But they recovered fast. This family was used to pressing people down with numbers. Blake tilted his head. Connor isn't the same person anymore. He's distant, he talks less, he's always tense. Why do you think that is? I didn't answer right away. I looked at Connor. He lowered his eyes to avoid mine. I saw the conflict in him clearly. Part of him wanting to protect me, the other part afraid of disappointing his mother. Blake jumped back in, as if afraid I might say something they didn't want to hear. The way you act affects Connor's personality. He changed because of you. I spoke softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. He changed because he grew up. Marian let out a long, heavy breath. No, dear, you're not seeing the most obvious thing. You are the reason this family is out of balance. I looked at them, each one. And in that moment, I finally understood what I'd only felt in pieces before. They didn't hate me. They hated anyone who refused to let them arrange every part of their life. They wanted a daughter-in-law who bent easily. Someone who said yes before even knowing what was being asked. I didn't do that. And that made me a threat. It wasn't me they disliked, it was my boundaries. But the moment their true nature showed didn't come from them. It came from Tori, the one who always chose the perfect moment to strike the deepest cut. She set her glass on the table. Actually, you did something more serious. I wasn't going to say anything, but I think the family should know. Marian turned to her. What is it? Last week, Tori said, her eyes fixed on me, Rhea talked badly about this family to the neighbor next door. I heard it from them myself. She said we were controlling and overbearing, and that she couldn't take it anymore. I looked straight at Tori. Not surprised, not shaken, but I did see the way she leaned back slightly when she realized my gaze wasn't moving. Marian put a hand to her chest, as if that story was the proof she'd been waiting for. Blake looked at me like he was confirming something he'd always suspected. No one asked whether it was true. No one needed to. They wanted a valid reason to accuse me, and Tori had just given it to them. The whole room shifted into full judgment mode. Marion said, "Did you really do that, Rhea? You insulted this family in front of outsiders?" I answered, "I never said that." Tori let out a small laugh. "You're denying it because you know they wouldn't lie. You think you're the only one who knows how to save face?" I didn't respond to her again. I had no reason to argue with someone who made up a story just to win. What I needed was to look at Connor, the one person who knew the truth. I turned to him. "You know I didn't say that." Connor looked down, then at Marion, then at the floor again. "Rhea, I didn't hear it myself, I'm not sure." The silence after that felt like stone pressing into my ribs. I didn't need him to fight for me. I just needed him not to accept an obvious lie. But he chose the familiar path, silence that kept his family comfortable. Tori leaned forward. "If you don't want to apologize, just say it, but don't pretend." Blake crossed his arms. "I think it's time Rhea takes responsibility for what she's done." Marion delivered her conclusion in the tone of someone convinced she was being fair. "We don't want you to leave this family. We just need you to acknowledge your mistakes. One apology is enough." That was their real goal, to make me submit, to make me admit to something I didn't do, because that would place me beneath them, exactly where they'd been waiting for me to stand. I didn't say anything. I stood up. The chair scraped softly, a dry sound in a room so quiet it felt suffocating. Everyone looked up, waiting for me to crack, or to apologize. But my face was calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I just stood there, looking at people who believed a lie more easily than they believed the person they'd spent so long telling to fit in. I took a slow breath. Not for courage, just to steady the rhythm for what I was about to say. The line they were completely unprepared for. And as I stepped away from the chair, I knew one thing. The moment I opened my mouth next, nothing would stay the same. The room stayed thick with accusation as I stood. No one moved. No one added a word. They thought I stood up to apologize or to defend myself the way people usually do when they've been pushed into a corner. But I didn't feel the need for any of that. I looked around slowly. From Blake, arms crossed like he was waiting for me to admit defeat, to Tori trying to keep her face calm while her hand tightened around her glass. Marion sat upright, her eyes locked on me, as if staring long enough would make me soften the way she wanted. I let them wait. Not to make things tense, but to make sure the words I was about to say landed in the exact moment they weren't prepared. I didn't counter every claim they'd made. I didn't need to dismantle their small accusations. Those were just a shell covering the bigger truth they always avoided. I looked straight at Marion, then at Connor, the one standing behind the chair I'd just left. He looked like he wanted to hold the air together before it collapsed, but he didn't have the grounding to do it. He just stood there, his hands unconsciously tightening together. I took a short breath and said, "It's not me who made him pull away from this family. He pulled away because this is a place where every feeling he has gets controlled, and he knows that better than anyone." No one reacted right away. The sentence hit the table like something sharp, not loud, but precise enough that no one had time to dodge it. Marion's expression changed first. Not anger, a blankness, like she'd just heard something she'd spent years burying under the label of family love. Blake opened his mouth but couldn't get a word out. Tori stayed frozen, her shoulders jerking slightly, eyes dropping to the table. She wasn't the one being targeted, but she understood instantly that the blow had cut straight through the foundation of their control. Connor stood completely still. He looked at me, as if this was the first time someone had said out loud what he'd been pushing deep into his chest for years. I saw it clearly in his eyes, that familiar pain. Not because I embarrassed him, but because he knew I was right in a way he could no longer hide from. This family doesn't love in the way they like to claim. They pull, press, shape, mold. They call it care. But it's really fear. Fear of losing control over the people they believe belong to them. What I said wasn't loud, but it cracked open something every person in that room knew yet never dared to face. Marion swallowed. She looked at Connor as if waiting for him to deny it. But he didn't. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on me, his jaw tight. I saw his hand twitch, like he meant to place it on my shoulder and calm me the way he always tried to keep the peace. But he didn't move. What I'd said stopped him right between two choices: his family or the truth. Tori was the first to try to recover her composure. "Rhea, you're misunderstanding. This family only wants what's best." I turned to her. "You don't need to explain. I'm not talking about what this family wants. I'm talking about what they do." Tori bit her lip. Blake turned away, as if trying to escape my eyes, even though I hadn't looked at him for more than a second. Marian straightened in her seat, trying to reclaim her old position. "You're exaggerating. We don't control anyone in this family." I held her gaze for a few seconds. "Then why does Connor have to ask for permission before making any decision in his own life?" Blake shot halfway out of his seat. "What are you saying?" I didn't look at him. "I live with him. I know the hesitation in everything he does. His fear didn't come from me. It started here." Connor exhaled sharply, like the words hit a place he'd kept sealed for years. He looked at his mother, then at Blake. Both of them waited for him to deny what I said. But he didn't. For a few seconds, the room felt drained of sound. No one knew what to say next. They were no longer in the position to accuse. They'd been pushed into facing themselves, something this family avoided by blaming anyone but their own. I looked at each of them, not mocking, not belittling, just clear. My eyes didn't ask for answers or expect them. They simply let them see that they'd been exposed by a single sentence. A sentence not meant to hurt, but to show what they'd spent years hiding. Marian braced her hand on the table. "Rhea, you don't understand this family's situation." "I understand," I said, "more than you think. And because I understand, I won't take the blame for things that aren't mine." Her lips tightened, her gaze slipping for a moment. This was her greatest fear, being seen through, right in the house she controlled the most. Blake turned to Connor, his voice sharp. "You're not going to say anything?" Connor opened his mouth, but couldn't form a word. He knew if he told the truth, everything with his family would break. If he lied, he'd break himself. And for the first time, I saw him unable to choose the easy path. Tori stood up, though she didn't move closer. "Rhea, you're making this worse? It's been bad for a long time," I said. "I'm just saying it out loud." No one answered. The whole room kept its distance. Not because they were afraid of me, but because they were afraid of what I'd just put on the table. The truth. The thing they never wanted to hear from anyone, especially from someone they assumed would always stay small. I looked at Connor one last time. He stood still, his chest rising and falling, like someone who'd just heard a secret he'd been hiding from himself for years. He looked like he wanted to speak, but I knew whatever he said, anything, would be twisted inside this room. I took one step toward him, though I didn't touch him. I only spoke, calm and steady, as if setting down something heavy I never planned to pick up again. "I'm not going to carry your fear for you anymore." Connor's eyes widened, but he didn't stop me when I turned away from the table. I walked straight out, without looking back. No one called after me. No one mentioned apologies again. They just sat there, silent, in the very thing they'd created. Something they never imagined they'd have to swallow themselves. The door closed softly behind me, and the silence inside Marian's house thickened at once, like dust that had been shaken loose after years of settling. No one followed. No one dared to call me back. Not because they respected me, but because what I'd said had taken away the one thing they relied on most, the power to control someone else's feelings. I walked down the hallway. My steps were slow and steady. I wasn't rushing. Someone else might have stormed out of that house in anger, but I wasn't angry. I was clear. And that clarity made my steps firmer than they'd ever been. When I neared the front door, I heard Connor's voice behind me, soft and strained. "Rhea, wait." My feet stopped, but I didn't turn right away. I let him come closer. I heard his quick breaths as he ran to catch up, not from exertion, but from trying to grasp something that had just slipped out of his hands, something he didn't fully understand yet. When he got close enough, I turned. Connor's face was still the face I once loved. Gentle, soft, always seeming like he wanted to do the right thing. But tonight, in the hallway light, I finally saw what I'd only sensed before but never faced head-on. His weakness. A quiet kind of weakness, not meant to hurt, but one that forced everyone around him to carry the weight of what he refused to confront. "Ria, I'm sorry," he said quickly. "You shouldn't have had to hear what they said. I just didn't know what to do." I looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time my calm wasn't a shield, it was clarity. "You're not cruel," I said. "You're just weak." Connor blinked, like the words hurt more than anything his family had ever thrown at him. "I don't want you to think of me that way." "I'm not thinking it," I said. "I'm seeing it. I've been seeing it for a long time." He lowered his head, his hands tightening into fists. "I'll change, I promise." "You won't change because I say so," I replied, my voice still steady. "You'll change only if you want to, and you never wanted it enough." He looked up, pain in his eyes but no denial. "Then, what do you want me to do right now?" I glanced at the door behind him. The door leading back into the house, where every emotion he had was shaped to match someone else's expectations. Then I looked at him again. "You have to stand on your own," I said. "But that's your work, not mine." He stepped back, as if my words pushed him away from the last piece of ground he thought he still had. "Ria, don't go," he said quietly. "At least, tell me why you're leaving. Is it because of them? Because of tonight?" I shook my head, softly, but firm enough for him to understand. "I'm not leaving because of them," I said. "I'm leaving because of me." The sentence wasn't loud, but in the hallway it sounded like a lock turning. Something small but clear, opening a path I'd just chosen. A path with no room left for silent endurance ever again. Connor swallowed hard, as if he understood exactly what I had just taken away from him. Not love. Permission. The permission for his fear to sit on my shoulders instead of his. He lifted his hand, but it dropped halfway. "I don't know what to do when you walk away like this." I looked at him one last time. "That's something you have to learn on your own." No comforting words, no regret. Only the truth. The truth he had to face the moment I turned away. I opened the door. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for anyone to call after me. The night air touched my skin, cold but light. I stepped outside, leaving behind a house sinking into silence. Silence because for the first time they had no one to blame, no one to control, no one to mold into the version of obedience they preferred. I didn't need to hurt them with actions. I didn't need to say another word. My leaving was the final blow. Not a blow meant to wound, but a clean cut that stripped them of the tool they relied on the most. Someone to carry their responsibility for them. Inside that house, I knew exactly what was happening behind me. Marian would try to reclaim control. Blake would push for answers to figure out who was at fault. Tori would look for a way to soften her part in the lie. But this time, they no longer had me to turn or twist. And for people like them, that was the hardest hit. And Connor, he stood between two worlds. One was his family, where every feeling he had had been shaped since he was young. The other was the truth he'd just heard. A truth he could no longer deny. He had no one left to stand behind. No one to carry his fear for him. He had to live with the space I left behind, and he had to face the things he'd let others decide for him. I stepped down the last stair, my hands steady. No bitterness, no pain, only clarity. When the door closed behind me, I knew my revenge arc was complete, not through shouting or anger, but by refusing to stay somewhere that no longer deserved me. I walked into the night, taking nothing with me except the clarity I'd taken back for myself. And for the first time in years, I felt light. That's the end of the story. Thank you for listening and for staying with me all this time.